The reaction we've gotten has been largely positive. Jason, who wrote the bulk of it, is more tuned into Reddit and stuff than I am. But people seem to really like it. You know, when we made it, we knew it was going to be for an extremely niche audience. And our prediction was that people would either really like it and listen to it or not care at all and not even check it out. You know, because, I mean, in our mind, if you're not a fan of both hardcore history and Game of Thrones, there's no really reason to listen to it. We've been pleasantly surprised to find that there are a lot of people who either have never heard hardcore history and still like our thing. There are some people who only watch the show Game of Thrones and have never read the book who still like our thing. And people who do like it seem to be pretty enthusiastic about it, but I'm certain I've got some kind of self-serving bias in terms of the stuff I absorb about that.
My jaw was on the floor at how the more subtle parts of his speaking character, you know, were captured, which is the way his cadence and the way his just volume will change based on what he's saying.
Kind of one of the guiding philosophies we had while we were working on this thing was that the joke was just that this exists. Like, that's the joke. Just the fact, you know, like, Jason's been listening to Dan Carlin for years, and he got me into him a couple of years ago, and I immediately became obsessed. And the goal was always just a very straight-faced, like, well, if Westeros were real, these military battles and this, like, political intrigue is the exact kind of thing Dan Carlin would do a series on his show. So what if that existed? And what if it sounded so close to how Dan Carlin sounds that it could pass for it? And, you know, that was always the goal. And then one of the things that, in our mind, really kind of made us double down on it was very early on. I think maybe before we had even recorded the first episode, we got a friend of ours to record the voice for the beginning part where it's like, you know, it's history, you know, that sort of stuff.
Right, yeah.
And got our buddy Mike, who recorded the entire thing for us, to assemble it into the opening thing. And once Mike put all that stuff together with the quotes from the TV show that we had pulled and all that sort of thing, it sounded so spot on that then all of a sudden Jason and I were like, oh, well, we really have to step things up now so that the quality of the show matches the quality of the intro.
Had you guys committed to the full 16 hours or whatever?
No, I mean, when it started, this is true to both A Song of Ice and Fire and anything Dan Carlin does. This project got bigger and bigger the more we got into it. So originally when we started doing it, like before we had talked to Howell or anything like that, when we were just doing it for us, when we had started doing it, we were like, this will be 3 episodes, and that'll be, 5 or 6 hours of a stupid bit that normally goes on for 10 minutes tops.
Yeah.
And that'll be like, we'll really be overdoing it then. And then we'd start writing an episode. Like the first time this happened was with episode 2, which is all about Tywin, and episode 3, which is all about Robert's Rebellion. Like originally those were both supposed to be one episode. And then we're like, fuck, there's too much here. We've really got to kind of split it apart. Okay, so we'll do 4 episodes, and then we would start, writing I think episode 6 was supposed to, I think episodes 5 and 6 were supposed to be one episode. And then we were like, you know what? There's actually a lot going on here because there's all 5 kings are in the war. We had better make this 2 episodes. And then once we did episodes 6, 7, and 8, those were originally all supposed to be one episode. And we emailed Howell and we were like, what's the longest we could make an episode? We might have an 8-hour episode on our hands. And they're like, no, you can't do that. You got to split it up into 3. And so then we wound up with 3 episodes, one of which was 4 hours long, So
yeah,
it just kind of it just kind of kept expanding a little bit. You know, and originally when we first signed a contract with Howl, they were like, you know, they said, can you bring us 5 episodes with a total of 10 hours of content?
Right.
And we were like, yeah, I think we can do that. And then we wound up delivering them 8 episodes in almost 19 hours. So
how early in the process did Howl come along? Like, how much mentally had you guys committed to doing this? You know, were you guys going to do it anyway, like just for yourselves or that type of thing?
Yeah, we were going to do it anyway, but I don't know if Howl hadn't been involved, if it would have been the same project. You know, I think if Howl hadn't been involved, and because originally the plan was we were just going to release it on SoundCloud.
Okay.
You know, and go like, okay, well, this will be for us, and if a couple of the other nerds pick it up, then we'll be thrilled.
Yeah.
But, you know, there wasn't, we didn't really have that much of a plan for it. We just wanted it to exist.
Right.
But, you know, so Howl came along. I think when we talked to Howl, we had recorded the first episode. And I know Paul Scheer just from around UCB, and this was before Howl had launched even. And I had seen some news items saying that Paul Scheer had launched a new podcast label under Earwolf's auspices, which I think is what Wolf Pop is.
Right.
And so, you know, I had said like, hey, you know, before we commit to releasing this on SoundCloud, like I know a couple of people, let me send some emails and see what we can do. And Paul was the first person I emailed. And I was like, hey man, we have this podcast we're doing. I don't know if this would be a good fit for you and Wolf Pop, but we're kind of looking for a home for it. So if you're into it, let me know. And if not, no worries. And Paul immediately was like, hey, there's this new thing that Earwolf is doing, and your podcast would be perfect for it. Let me put you in touch with those guys. And Howl was very supportive right from the get-go. They made us one of the featured podcasts on their app when they first launched. And that was, I mean, the first episodes went up with them in August of 2015. So we must have started talking to them like, you know, 3 or 4 months before that even.
What is it about Dan Carlin's style of talking about history that made you really, you know, you mentioned you got obsessed with him pretty quickly. What are your favorite things about Dan Carlin's show and about his personality and how he relates to history?
Man, there's a lot. You know,
yeah.
So I never really studied history at all, either in high school or college.
Yeah.
You know, I had taken a couple of requisite courses, but I just never really got into it for whatever reason. And Dan Carlin had a way of contextualizing stuff that made it interesting to me, you know, in sort of like a broader sense, but in a more immediate sense, you know, especially when you listen to like Ghosts of the Ostfront, which is his series on the Eastern Front of World War II. That's like the first thing of his I ever listened to. And he starts with this like fucking heady question of like, you know, there's like, what is a monument? You know, like, and he goes through this like whole thing about like the bone fields outside of, I can't remember if it's Stalingrad or Leningrad, but he goes on these tangents, these unbelievable tangents that are like so, you know, so random. And like, you know, when you're listening to episode 3 or 4 of Blueprint for Armageddon, where he starts off talking about, I believe Shackleton in the Antarctic, you know, like coming back to land and asking who won the war, and it's still going on, and that blowing his mind. He has a way of finding individual people who are affected by these broad sweeping trends in history here and there that make it very interesting. You know, so much of the beginning of Blueprint for Armageddon, for instance, is about the execution of the Schlieffen Plan and how much that rested on von Moltke's shoulders. You know, or when you listen to, you know, for instance, Wrath of the Khans, so much of that is just about individual Khans, whether it's, Genghis or Subadai or Ogadai or, any of them, just being kind of like, just wanting to push things and see how far they could go, or in the most recent, the King of Kings, so much of it is about these, I think King of Kings is all Persian, so much about these like Persian kings, like again, just like seeing how far they could go, and it makes you kind of realize that whereas history had always been presented to me, in high school, part of the reason I never got into it, it had been presented to me as a list of names and numbers you needed to remember.
Right.
And Dan Carlin did a very good job for me, I think, of making it clear that, like, yeah, there are names and numbers, but that's actually not the important part. The important part is to remember that, like, these huge world-changing things are triggered by individual people who have their own individual shit they're working through. And that dovetails so nicely with A Song of Ice and Fire, I think, because one of the things that, in my opinion, George R. R. Martin does very well in the books that gets left out in the show is to show how much the stability of the Kingdom of Westeros, or the stability of any political entity, fundamentally rests on individuals who may be unable to act as they would wish to act because they are trapped by history and position and that sort of stuff. Yeah. So to have Dan Carlin analyze that seemed like something we really wanted to see, but he famously doesn't take requests for his show, and even if he did, there's no way, we could call him up and go like, well, could you do a Game of Thrones one? So we just did it ourselves. It's funny because originally the project really was built for an audience of 4, which was myself, Jason, Mike, who wound up recording the whole goddamn thing for us, and then Mike's brother Nick, who is just our friend, would be there for all of those bits. And so, our threshold for success with hardcore Game of Thrones was always, well, if Mike and Nick like it, then it's fine, and maybe some other people will listen to it. And so now it's kind of crazy that this thing that had literally been made for the 2 of us and an audience of 2 other people has been heard by over 20,000 people. It's very humbling, it's very flattering, and it's very mind-boggling.
I wanted to ask you about Jason's process. When you sit down to record, is he handing you like a full script with parentheticals and these clauses and these asides, or is he doing mostly like the Thrones history and you're adding the Carlinisms, or how does that work?
Normal routine was that Jason would send me a script, and then Jason's script would be like 80% done, like it would, and a lot of the pauses and asides and like, Meister Carlin like muttering to himself, most of that stuff is written in. Some of it is definitely just comes out in the performance of it, but a shocking amount of it is written into the script. But so Jason would send me a script, and then I would go through, and my job would be mostly either in most cases my job was just to flesh it out, and then I would send it back to Jason. But so if Jason sent me a 45-page script, normally by the time I was done with it, it would be like 55 pages long or something like that. And then Jason would go do a third pass on it to make sure that I hadn't fucked up any of the facts. Because sometimes I would change something just because of the wording of it. And then Jason would go like, actually we have to change that back because that's a reference to this one tiny thing that happens in the books. And I'd go like, really? He'd go like, oh yeah. So it was, as much as I genuinely love the books, I have to give Jason credit for being the brains behind this. Like, I think if I wasn't around, or Mike wasn't around, we could have found someone else to record it. You could probably find somebody whose Carlin impression sounds less like Marge Simpson. But I don't think this would have been possible without Jason. I think of the 3 of us, he's the only indispensable one. Honestly, I stopped watching the show this season. It's a long-running thing that some hardcore fans of the books don't care for the show as much. Yeah. And last season watching the show every season watching the show was like they would have like 2 or 3 really great episodes and then 7 or 8 episodes that just felt like connective tissue that didn't really do it for me. But the episodes that were really great were really great. Like the Battle of the Blackwater is a great episode. Like when Ned gets beheaded, that's like a phenomenal moment. Like the show is, the fight between the Purple Wedding episode is great. The Red Wedding episode is great. The fight between the Viper and the Mountain is great. Like there's a lot of stuff the show does really, really well. But
I think you said that in the Splitsider piece. You said it's good at capturing the big moments. And then
but that's part of what inspired the project, honestly, is because the things the books do so well is make you see how those big moments are just the piling up of all of these tiny, inevitable moments,
Right.
Even just the whole reason that the kingdom is so unstable is because of Robert's rebellion, because somebody gave someone a fucking flower at a tournament, like that.
Right.
Like that gets totally glossed over in the show, and a lot of like the nuance that makes the characters so interesting in the books gets totally glossed over in the show. And season 5, I was still watching it. I think Jason stopped watching it the season earlier, but season 5, I was still watching it, and every week it just felt like homework. It wasn't something I was excited to watch. It was something I felt obligated to watch.
Right.
And so this year I was just like, hey, you know what? And I've actually heard this season's been really good. But I've been burned too many times to make it a priority. So maybe I'll go watch it at some point, and it's impossible to avoid any kind of a spoiler. So I know the Hound is back. I know Jon Snow is back. I know Arya just fought the Waif. It's like for someone who tried to read any news about it, like I know that Ramsay's about to have a big battle with Jon Snow up at the Wall. I know more about it than I'd care to, but I just haven't watched it all year. My theory is actually, and I obviously come at this as somebody who wants to make TV for a living, so I'm analyzing it a little bit differently. But I think that one of the things I compared also to Fargo season 2. Season 2 is fucking freight train. But so one of the things that Fargo season 2 does really, really well is something that the Game of Thrones books do really, really well, which is to tell a complex story from multiple character viewpoints effortlessly. And one of the reasons Fargo season 2 is able to do that is because it was a limited series and they didn't have to give any of the actors concessions towards future seasons, right? So, like, there will be characters in Fargo season 2 who you follow intimately as if they're the main character of the story for an episode or 2 episodes or 3 episodes. And then when their part of the story is done or it's not as important anymore, they sort of fade away and maybe you don't see them for a couple of episodes or maybe they're just kind of supporting characters or what have you. Mm-hmm. With Game of Thrones, part of the reason half the season is such a slog to get through is because in order to keep someone like Emilia Clarke employed on the show, they have to promise her, and this is just how contracts work, they have to promise her that she's going to be in 8 episodes out of the 10. When you have that kind of a pressure affecting the creative process, now all of a sudden you can't do what the books do. And the best example of this from the books, and this is actually maybe not a fair example to the TV show because this is something I don't think you could do in the medium of television, but in the books, when Theon gets captured, when Winterfell falls and Ramsay betrays Theon and takes Winterfell, Theon just disappears from the books. He's just totally gone. You don't even think about him for like 800 pages. And then this character Reek shows back up, and you don't even connect it that it could be Theon. You can't do that in a situation where you've got to keep Alfie Allen in 8 out of 10 episodes every season. And so, watching the show, you can feel, when you know that, you can feel the scenes that aren't being written for any creative purpose. They're being written for a contractual purpose. We have to keep so-and-so on the show. Okay. And, it's telling that, for instance, The Mountain has famously been played by, I think, 4 different actors or 3 different actors at this point, because he was never a big enough character to have to be thrown that contractual bone. He's someone they only needed 1 episode a year. And even though it's Game of Thrones and that's a huge high visibility project and that's a huge high visibility character, they couldn't get the same actor to be available for all of the mountain scenes. And so when you watch the show over the course of many seasons, you can start to feel these moments where it's like, why are we checking in with these people? It feels like we're just marking time. And it's because you are. It's because they need Peter Dinklage to be around because he's the core of the show, or whatever.
Right.
And those unnecessary scenes start to crowd out moments that are more necessary from the book. And so I think for a lot of us who've read the books, you can feel that discrepancy. Whereas if you've never read the books, you don't have that, you don't have that standard of comparison to compare it to. And so maybe you feel like some episodes are marking time or that they're not particularly like united or they feel a little bit disjointed, but you don't appreciate what you're losing and for sake of that disjointedness. And so I don't watch the show anymore. I'm too aware of it. When you watch Fargo season 2, just think about how different that story would be if they had to check in with every character every week. And Game of Thrones is sprawling. There's a ton of characters, and they're all crucial at some point. So you need to hang on to those actors, but you can't. You couldn't get like Lena Headey to just clear her schedule to shoot one episode a year if that's all you need Cersei for that season.
Right.
So you have to continually check in with them all the time, and it greatly disrupts the rhythm of the storytelling in a way that it makes it tough for me to watch.